Alright, hi everybody. I wanted to do a quick video on painting the gnome. So this is the gnome that I carved in the tutorial series, and I want to give a few pointers on how I paint it. I'm not going to paint it from start to finish on camera. That would take too long and be boring, but I'll give you a general idea of how I do this. Notice first of all that I have given it a coat of boiled linseed oil, and I just recorded another video where you can watch and see how I do that. But he has been oiled up just about 10 or 15 minutes ago, and so he is ready to go for paint. So there's not a lot of real secrets to this, but what I'm using is just acrylic paint, and I'm going to start with the beard. For the beard I'm using kind of a darker gray color. This is called French gray. And you don't need a whole lot of paint. I just get a little bit in there, and I do mix it up with some water to thin it out a little bit. Some people use droppers and measure it out, and I just kind of go about, I don't know, I put in about the same amount, probably close to 50-50 paint and water, and stir that up. Actually, on the beard, I want it to be a little bit heavier on the paint side, because then I'm going to come back and dry brush it. So I want a pretty good thickness. But the way I do this is I put the paint in and I stir it up good. And then what kind of happens is that the middle of the pool here is a little bit thicker, and the edges of the pool are a little bit thinner. And then sometimes, just to make sure I've got what I want, I'll put a little drop of pure undiluted paint on the side there. And then all I do is I use a really thin brush. You can see this is a 10/0. I don't know a lot about brushes or brush sizes. What I know is that I like to use a really thin brush so I can get the edges around nice and crisp and clean. And this is a nice, small, tiny brush that helps me do that. I actually find that it's easier to find these little brushes in the model section of your hobby store. So if you're at Michael's or Hobby Lobby or wherever, if you go into the models section, they have these really fine point, whereas over in the kind of paint and acrylic section, it's harder to find the really, really fine point. So what I do is I'll typically start with just a little dab out of the center of the paint there, and I'll start on the back. The back's always a low-risk place to start anything, and just paint really lightly underneath the brim and the brim of the hat. And really what I'm trying to do is just go along all the sides. It's like when you're a kid and you're coloring a coloring book, and you start by coloring along the lines, and then you come back and fill it in. That's kind of the approach that I generally take here. So what I'm trying to do is just get really carefully right up to the bottom brim of the hat, kind of all the way around. Okay. And then once I get over here, of course, I'm going to want to try to really go along the edge of the beard and the mustache here without getting it on the cheek. Now, if you mess up, you accidentally get some on the cheek or somewhere where it doesn't go, it's not a huge deal. You get your knife, and you just take the tip of your knife and you really carefully kind of scrape it off. So that's really it. I'm not going to film the rest of it, but what I will do after I get the edges done is I'll come back with a slightly bigger brush. This brush isn't huge because the beard's not huge, but I'll come back with a slightly bigger brush and just use that to kind of get the bulk of the area painted in more detail. So I'm going to pause there and finish up the beard, and then come back for the coat next. Okay, I've finished painting the beard, and so you can see that there. And I'm going to move on to the coat. I'm going to do a red coat with a yellow hat on this guy. So basically the same thing. I have already mixed up my red paint here. I'm using a color called Christmas Red, and about 50-50 paint and water here stirred up. Now, when I'm painting here, on the beard I really wanted a pretty thick coat of gray, because then I'm going to need that as a base layer to do the dry brushing, which we'll get to. But on the coat, I want to be able to kind of see the wood through it. I'll start in the back again, as I always do, and get a little bit out of the middle, because that's going to be a little bit thicker, and start kind of edging the way that I did with the beard and hair also, and start getting the edges done. And then this big back area is a good place to kind of show how the watered down paint can help. So I did wash out my brushes too in between segments here, but I'm going to take more from the side here because it's a little bit more watery here. And as I paint there, you can hopefully see that it's just going on a little thinner. If you look over here, it's really thin. Some people really water down their paints to get a really thin layer look. I go about halfway watered down in between, but that's coming out really nice. I can see the wood under it. It adds a nice kind of dimension or depth to it, and I can just keep working that across. And yeah, then when I get to the tighter spots, I'm going to go back to my really fine tip brush here, take out of the middle where the paint is just a little bit thicker, and get those edges in those tight areas. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it and finish up the coat like that. Okay, so I finished painting the coat red. You can see that there. It's a nice thin red. You can see the wood grain and wood through it. I like the way that looks. The other thing I did off camera while I was paused there was I took a hair dryer and I used it to dry some of the paint here so I can hold it a little bit easier. Sometimes I will use, I'll show you here. I recently created some of these little things, and if you drill a pilot hole, you can screw that there, and then you could hold on to this without holding the carving, but I'm not using that today. So I've already mixed up some yellow paint here. This is called Lemon Custard. I liked that yellow hat I did on a gnome a few weeks ago, so I'm going to use that one. And for the hat, the one thing I'll say is that I don't like using the super watered down paint under the brim here. I want it to be a little bit thicker so it doesn't just run down onto the cheeks and the hair. So what I'll usually do is get a little bit here, but then take just a little bit. This one up here is undiluted. This one is, about 50-50 watered down. So get just a touch out of both of them so it's a little bit thicker, and then work along the bottom brim of that hat. So hopefully you can see that there. Normally I'm holding this a lot closer to my body to be able to see. But my concern on the brim again is if I really use the super watered down paint, then I don't know, I always have trouble with it kind of bleeding down the cheeks and onto the hair and things like that. So I like to have it a little bit thicker there. And you can see I'm just taking just a little tiny bit of paint on this little tiny brush and trying to hold it as still and carefully as I can. That's kind of boring, so I'll stop there and switch to the larger brush, but this is going to be straightforward. I'm just going to use the larger brush. Again, I've washed these out since I was using the red for the paint, and just paint it on there. Spread it out until you get the level of thinness that you want. Again, I'm intentionally wanting some kind of thinner, I'm taking it just from the edge here where my paint is a little thinner, and I can get this great yellow kind of sheen on it. You can really see the wood grain under it that the oil brings out, and then the thin paint looks pretty cool. So everything up here I don't really have to worry about being detailed here because everything's going to be yellow. So just really get that paint in there and then spread it around. So I'm going to pause again and finish up the hat. The other thing to note, I guess I'll do that real quick here, is I always paint this little triangle down here to match the hat. So I'll paint that in yellow. Alright, I'm going to pause and finish up the hat, then we'll be back to dry brush the beard. Alright, so I painted the hat, but I unpaused it before getting to the dry brushing of the beard, because I did a little bit of a sloppy job here. On the back here you can see the yellow paint kind of running down onto the hair. I'm going a little bit quicker than I usually do, trying to get this done, but that's just a little sloppy. So I'll show you. This is a good teaching moment. I'll just use the tip of my knife. I have my little detail knife, so I have a nice thin blade here, and I'm just gonna kind of shave that off. Depending on how bad it is, you can, get it down to the wood again. It's fine, not a big deal. Clean off those little paint chips, and then I washed off my fine brush here to just fill that in. So easy to make touch-ups if you need to. You can always do that. Okay, I've got my whole gnome painted up. The last thing I want to do is dry brush the beard to add some texture. So if you're not sure what that is, check out the difference between those beards. You can see that white paint on the high parts of the beard of the guy on the right, and that really brings out the facets and add lots of texture to it, using a technique called dry brushing. And I may do another video with a little bit more detail here, but I would direct you to Doug Linker's excellent video on dry brushing. I hesitate to even record myself dry brushing because he's got such a good video on it, but I do want to kind of show you the gnome from start to finish, so I'll include this here. So you can see I switched out my palette for a paper towel. I switched out my brush. This is like a super cheap, probably came out of a set of watercolors that one of my girls got. And dry means the brush is dry and the paint has no extra water added. And I'm just going to go straight into the paint there and then kind of go like this to get all the excess paint off. And the idea is you want just a little bit of paint on that brush. I'm going to do that like 5 or 6 times. I can see when I go down, I'm getting a lot of paint off, and by the end it's mostly off. Do that, a bunch of times to kind of load that brush up with paint. I'm gonna do it on the sides in case I get at a bad angle. I don't want to have too much paint, so that's probably good. I'll do it one more time, about like that. Now you can always add more paint. You can't take paint off super easily at this point, so err on the side of having less paint on your brush if you can. I always start on the back because if I mess up on the back, it's lower risk. And what I'm going to do is I've got my loaded paintbrush, and I'm just going to kind of go back and forth like this, kind of briskly, and watch that white paint kind of brush off. So you see that white coming on there? It's coming in pretty good. I'm just going to keep doing that, going around. I've got a little bit, so I got to go over a bunch to get there. That's a good amount. And I will say, I have practiced this a lot. And my first several attempts did not turn out great. So you want to practice, just get a piece of wood, put a bunch of scores in it with your V-tool or whatever, paint it some color, and grab another color and try to dry brush it. Hopefully you can see that well there. But that's it. I'm just going to continue it all the way around. What I want to do is kind of go perpendicular to the facets, and I'm losing paint a little bit, so I get just a little bit more. I want to kind of stay perpendicular to the cuts that I made. That's going to really bring that out. It's just fun to watch. It's like magic. You just see that brush go by, and then there's this cool little effect on it. But yeah, that's about it. Sometimes, you know, I slip a little bit and get a little paint on the arm or the cheek, and again, I come back with my knife and kind of clean that up some. Try to get these inside edges here a little bit. Yeah, it makes a huge difference on what that beard looks like. Super cool. All right. So I would say that is it. There's our painted, completed traveling gnome. Thanks for watching the whole thing from start to finish. I appreciate it.